My paranormal experiences have been all my life. I was born as one who could see and walk between both worlds. So even as a young child, I was seeing ghosts and other beings that they say don't exist. And you would go and tell your parents, and they would always say, it's your imagination, it's your imagination. So I just stopped telling people what was going on around me. And mentally, I just started fading out sometimes of their reality, and I would go in the woods and be in my own little world. And years later, I figured out that where I went was the spirit world. And I would play with the spirits of the land, and I would play with the spirit of the tree, and I would play with the spirit of the animals as my interaction, because I didn't have interaction at home. And so that world became my reality. And always they say it doesn't exist, but all native tribes and aboriginal tribes know that the spirit world walks right beside us, and they honor the spirit world. They do ceremony to thank the spirit world. They call their ancestors in when they're having a ceremony for protection, for healing, for love and community. So I think that when your mind is open like that, you have more paranormal experiences than a normal person, because you're seeing in both realms. So another place that I would go, I had these little tea sets that were made of ceramic, and they're just like a little tea set with a little teapot and a little sugar bowl and a little creamer bowl. And I would take red Kool-Aid and put it in the cups and play in the flowers. Then I started noticing that there was these little, it would be so fast, it just looked like a dark streak, but the Kool-Aid would move in a cup, whereas if something had touched it. And then pretty soon there would be something touching all the little cups, and it would just be a little dark shadow that would fly by. You couldn't really, it's not like the books where you see a little tiny fairy. It was just a dark shadow. Like maybe they're lighter than we are or something. We can't see them well. I don't know. So those became my first playmates, the little people. And I would sit for hours and have tea parties with invisible beings and talk to them. And I don't know if they really had conversation back with me because I was a child. And then my Irish grandmother would tell me stories of the little people and how to fool them. Like if you see a little person, if you close one eye, the little person will remain. If you close the wrong eye, the little person will be gone. And to me, that says they're interdimensional, and they can come and go at will. They can disappear at will, and they can also do glamours like we see in the magic shows. An example of that would be, one day I'm driving home from work, and on the side of the road, I saw a little tiny man, and he looked like he was dressed in homespun material. He had a little hat and a little shirt and pants, and next to him was laying a sack that looked made of the same material, and he was holding a little tiny homemade rustic looking shovel. And I literally stopped my car, and I've got both eyes wide open, trying to figure out what eye close if I had to blink, and what eye do I keep open. And I kept looking at him, and his face was very weird. It was almost like he was made of the inside of a tree, where you see all those lines going when you chop a tree in half, and you see the lines in the tree. His face looked like that. Very, I don't know. It's about all I can explain. It just looked like the inside of a tree. And he knew I saw him. He was looking at me funny. And I kept looking and looking and looking. And then finally I had to blink. And when I did blink, all of a sudden, all that was there was a bush. So they can fool you like that. It's called a glamour. And I had another time that I had a glamour pulled on me, where I have a spirit guide, and I call him the little green man. As a kid, I could see him. Sometimes people can see him if they have the sight now, if he's around. And he's a little woodland spirit. and he wears like like you see in some of the drawings, almost like an acorn type ish hat. Well, he's bigger than that, but he's probably about a foot tall, and his clothes seem to be like leaves, and he's greenish looking. He's like got a greenish glow. And I saw him as a child. I never told anybody because they would tell me it was my imagination, but he used to play with me when I was in the woods. And we would talk back and forth, play games, and so he's always been around me. And one time I'm camping. I like to go camping for 2 weeks all alone, and this was in Georgia, and there was a beautiful creek there, and I'm surrounded by forest, and no one else is there but me. And I'm sitting in the middle of the creek on a rock, and something pulls the back of my shirt. And I jump up and turn around, and I look, and there's a pine cone sitting there on the trail. And then I hear laughter, like way down the creek, like a little kid laughing. And I thought, whoa, maybe this is my friend, because sometimes he'll come into the physical. So I sit down on the rock again, turn my back to the pine cone. Something pulls my shirt. I jump up, turn around, and look. And here in the Georgia woods is a horny toad. Now, I know that there are no horny toads in Georgia, not in that woods anyways. And that's a glamour. It's like they can fool your brain into seeing something that isn't really there. And I looked and I thought, a horny toad. I hadn't seen those since I was a kid, and it made me smile because I love horny toads. And then I hear laughter far down the creek. And there's been other times when he's come out in the physical. Like one time I had a medicine wheel at my tree where I would go in the forest and meditate and everything. And I took a bunch of different things and made myself a medicine wheel to meditate on. And in one part, I put a little clown doll, just a little like beanbag clown for the sacred clown. And came back a couple hours later and the clown was gone. And I looked around and he was behind a tree and it was wet, like it had slobber on it. And I thought, well, that's odd, but this is mine. And I put it back in my wheel. And then my kids came out to visit me and we're sitting there. And my daughter has her back to this tree and she kept turning around and looking at the tree and looking at me. And I thought, he's still here. So others can feel him when they come, if they're in tune. And a few weeks later, that same daughter was climbing a tree in those same woods, and she came up around a branch, and she met a little person that looked a lot like the first one I described, and they met face to face, and she screamed and went one way, and he screamed and went another way. And she came home wild-eyed and white, going, oh, Mama, I saw a little person face to face. So we can see them. I think they choose when we can sometimes, or they're caught, like with my daughter, playing around and poking around in this realm, and we unexpectedly come across them. And another thing that happened in that house was the most magical thing I think has ever happened to me. One night, I'm in my bedroom and I'm with a guy that I was dating, and we're just sitting there talking, and stuff. And my ceiling lit up like red runes, like lights. And he looked at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I don't know what this is. And it looked like little runes or something. And it was so bizarre. And then we heard in the forest outside of my house, we heard like singing and flutes playing and stuff, but it wasn't the way that humans play their flutes and their instruments. It sounded disjointed. And there would be some flute music, but it didn't flow quite like how our music flows. And there was a lot of singing and just strange stuff. And then things began to happen in our house. And what I figured out is that the little people travel 4 times a year, and this is in all the old folklore legends. And this was one of those days. It turned out on one of those days. And I think what they did is open a portal into the forest where I lived beside. And they were there for a while, and everybody began to see them. Like one of my sons said, "Oh my gosh, there's these yellow little flying fairy looking things in the living room." Or had a guest come over one day, and he's looking around wide eyed, and he's like, "I see this little person standing in your house." And I'm like, "Yeah." And we all started seeing them. Like, they knew I was friendly with the little people. Maybe it was why, they knew my family would be okay with that, because I, taught them that when they were a kid. You don't have to suppress what you hear, see, and feel, because it's all valid. And then there were two little guys, and one had a red hat and one had a blue hat, and they were both about 1.5 feet tall. And I really never could see their clothes. I just would see their head and their hats. And I worked in a metaphysical shop, and I came in there one day, and one of them followed me to work, literally followed me to work. And I walk in, and my friend is psychic. We're running a psychic store with herbs and healings and tarot readings and all that. So I walk in, and she's like, "Something followed you in." And I'm like, "Yeah." She knew about the ones at my house, and she was okay with him staying in our store. And so he would do weird things. Some mornings we would come in, and all of the greenery or something in a vase would be thrown on the floor, or there'd be a little pile of like a tea box and a crystal and something else laying in the middle of the floor. So we thought it was magical, and she thought it was magical, and it was fun. And we would play with him. Like, she would put a magazine open on the floor and then put her hand above it and say, "Well, turn the page." And he would turn the page without her touching it. And he would do that like all day long. He loved to play like that. And one day this lady comes in, and she saw Gene doing the turn the page, playing with him. And she goes, "Well, I just don't believe in any of that." And we were like, "Well, that's all right, And she goes, "Well, then show me what is going on here." So we sat her down on the floor and told her just to put her hand out and see if he would give her a gift. And sure enough, he popped a watermelon seed in her hand. And we had never, ever, ever eaten watermelon in that building. Never. We're neither one of us a watermelon-y person. And he put a watermelon seed in her hand. And the lady's mouth drops open. She's like, "Well, that was weird." And then he would hang out in the back room, and sometimes the customers would come out and go, "Man, there's something in the back room just staring at me. I was so afraid to go to the little girl's room." So other people could feel them too, but you can't really see them unless they want you to. You just know they're there. Things happen. You don't see it happen, but there was no one else in our store to put that tea and the crystal and all those little objects in the middle of the floor. And they just do tricks like that. They play with our things in this realm, it appears. They probably find it fascinating. And another time we went to my store late at night, and I had my friend Pam with me, and she was born to a lineage of women who had the sight. What they call it in Georgia. You have the sight. And she always hated it, but she had it. And we go into my store late at night one night to get something, and the little guy was in there, and she saw him run across the floor, and then he jumped up on the rocker, and the rocking chair literally started rocking. Like, we startled him, and he ran and he jumped on that rocker, and then he tried to jump out the window, and he hit the window. Now, that makes no sense to me. If you're interdimensional, why that would happen, but he did. He hit the window. We saw the window move. We saw the rocking chair move, and she got spooked. We had to leave. She didn't like that kind of thing. But he hung out in our store for a long time. Did a lot of little things like that. And then one day he pushed it too far, and he jumped up on top of where there were 3 glass shelves in a row on the wall. And he hit that top shelf, and it broke, and it went down, broke the second shelf, broke the third shelf. And Jean saw him jump on that. And that was when we had to make him come and go back home with me, because he was being too rambunctious in there. Now, how they can do that, I have no explanation. I just know what we saw, what we felt, and how it all comes about. And then at home, I started noticing one was red hat and one was blue hat. And never did the two appear together. I don't know why that is. I don't know what to call those little beings. I don't always have names for what we see. But there was a lot of magical happenings back then. And when it came time for them to leave, I was driving home late at night one night, and it was one of those foggy Georgia nights. And coming down the road from where they had opened that portal and moving was in the fog, like shadows, like you see where the little people move, and they have the queen on her little tiny horse. And then there was marching fairies behind her, and they're all sorts of shapes and sizes. And the best I can say that I've seen is that Brian Froud, the artist, draws them. They don't always have the same clothes on like that, but I never really saw their clothes. I would see their outlines or something like that. It looked just like one of those fairy tales where you see the little people are moving and they're all lined up and in a line, and they left that night. And coincidence, it was another night that the fairies always move. So I don't know, and all the stuff stopped happening in our house. It went back to normal. The fairies were gone, and they moved on to some other realm or some other portal or whatever. I don't know how to explain that. So up here where I live in a tree house is what I call it. It's actually an upper part of an old bar, and I'm surrounded by trees. So if I go on my deck, I'm in the trees, and I pretend it's my tree house. And not 15 feet from my ramp, the bottom of my ramp, is a thin line of trees, and then my neighbors are on the other side of those trees. So the first year I moved in there, it was actually this time of year in the spring, and I was outside playing around. I go play in the dark a lot. I like it at night. And I hear 3 little squirrels making noises. The squirrels don't make noises at night. And because I've always been around the little people, I knew it was little people. That's not a squirrel. So I said out loud, I said, you guys know that squirrels are quiet at night, don't you? So if you're trying to fool me, it didn't work. There's a pause. And then 3 little birds started chirping. And I thought, I have little people here. I never thought I would have little people. So I started paying more attention, and I walked up this little road that we have, and there was a small X. And from that land on, it turned out to be like little people land. And they would come to that section of trees between me and my neighbors to watch the kids. And I went out there one day and I was filming, and I've got pictures of a little boy climbing on a limb and an owl person standing next to him. And then they were so bold. There was 4 of them that came up and were in the bushes right next to me, but you still can't see them, but you could hear them. And it made me kind of nervous. Now, little people can be fun and friendly, but on the other hand, they also can be very vicious. And I would have to say that I'm more afraid of them than a lot of other things. You don't ever want to make the little people mad, is kind of the Irish thing. We know this, always keep them happy. And so I got pictures of them in there, and I started paying more attention to them. And then in the winter one year, I took them spaghetti over there, and I don't know if in the snow, if they're still in and out of this realm or not, but I put spaghetti over there, and I said, this is for the little people. And then the next spring, I noticed that coming from that same spot, there was a large rock, and it was in the middle of the road, and I thought I had to go pick that up, and then I got sidetracked, and I didn't. And then the next day, the rock has rolled a little closer to me, and I thought I should pick it up, and I didn't. And I kept ignoring this rock rolling across the road, and then finally they rolled it all the way up into the grass and up to my ramp. And then I had to notice it because I'll trip over it. So I looked at it, and it was actually a Native American tool that was about, I don't know how much it weighs, maybe 5 or 7 pounds, somewhere in there, and on one side had been shaped like a wedge, and on the other side it was round like a handle. And they had rolled me a tool over as a gift for the spaghetti, is what I felt, anyways. I've also been gifted a little tiny round white egg and a little tiny round white ball. Those two came at the same time. I just walk outside and they'll just be laying there somewhere in my path. And last year was especially fun. I'm cleaning my porch for the year, and I pull back my doormat at the front door, and there's a little tiny key. It was about an inch big, and I thought that's so funny. They put a key under my doormat, and I don't have anything like that. I've never owned anything with a little key like that. I've cleaned that porch 1,000 times. So I knew it had to be them. And then I found a little tiny blue marble and a little tiny yellow star, both all put right there up at my porch. So I put all of them in a little fairy village that I build every year on my front porch, and they came and took the key back. So why, I don't know. I guess I'm not allowed that door now. But they do things like that. But then there's also a dark side to the little people. And people in Ireland and other countries where they recognize little people know about these things. And they know if on your land you should always leave a wild spot, like take a bunch of branches and brush and just leave the brush in that area, leave some trees, leave a piling of brush and stuff for them to hide in. And then that makes them happy. So when people would come in, like say they would plow down the whole field and not leave a space for the little people would be unhappy because you've taken away their habitat and you haven't paid them honor. And things will start happening around your ranch. Your tractor won't work, your car will break down, your water heater will go out. People might even start getting sick. And in some places, they know that when this happens, either to have someone come talk to the little people and look at their land, or to start feeding the little people and to give them that little habitat back. And the gifts they give a lot are red man tobacco. They like that kind of tobacco a lot. Rye whiskey, and if they're messing up, that's what I give them. I give them a shot of whiskey or vodka or wine or any kind of alcohol, and I'll set it outside and they'll stop misbehaving. And then hard candy. They like hard candy, especially if it has a little wrapper on it. And I don't leave that out much because I'm afraid of the wildlife and I don't want to hurt anything else, but that is one thing that they absolutely love is hard candy. So giving them gifts and honoring them helps you and your land. And in some countries we were taught, oh, that's your imagination, but in other countries they know it to be part of their reality, that you always honor the little people. There was even a place, I forget what country, but there was a big rock that was for the little people, and they made them build the road around it so as not to disturb the little people's space. And if they give you a gift, you need to be wary. Like, they gave me that key. Well, I didn't bring it in my house. You just really don't fully accept all their little gifts and stuff because they might want something back in return and you might not like what it is. Or they might be playing a prank on you. Or the few things that I did keep, I knew were mine, and I felt that there wasn't going to be any repercussion for me keeping them. But they're just not always nice. They're not these little fairies with wings that look like a little princess. And the frog draws them the best that I can see, with the long, crooked noses, the weird, deformed limbs and arms, hiding in the bushes, hiding in a mushroom, hiding in the trees, playing pranks on people. It seems to be a great joy of theirs is to play pranks on humans. So the little people here have the X, and I became curious of that. And then one day I was walking up that trail, and there was a limb just thrown for no reason into the trail and pointing. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to follow this. So I followed it, and I found underneath this one tree they had taken sticks, just like our other cryptids do, and they had made an A, and it was sitting there, and it was plain as day that it had been manipulated, and all the sticks looked the same, and it was a perfect A, and it was up on a branch, kind of, but the perfect shape. And so I made my glyph, which is a Y. I put a Y stick down because that's my signature to nature. I've always done that all my life. And I came back the next day, and there was one stick that had been broken, and they had taken and laid part of the stick over the other stick, and right beside my Y was a little tiny Y. And I thought, these are little people interacting with me. It just felt like little people. So we started playing around, and then I noticed that leaning up against a tree was a 20-foot branch that was leaning on another branch, and it formed a huge A. And I don't know if their bigger cryptid friends joined in then or what was going on. I think the little people and the other cryptids all know each other and possibly work together. But then there was this big A. So for the whole summer, we did that. We played with our sticks, and we rearranged them into different formations, none of which do I understand what it means. They would make little arrows and have me follow a path, and then at the end of the path would be another A. Things like that. I left them gifts. They never took any of the gifts. And none of them in that area gave me any gifts, I don't believe, unless they're the ones that brought the key. And I didn't really ever see them, so I can't say for sure it's little people. It just felt like this was little people land with their little tiny X, and as part of the world, there's places still here in our forest where nobody goes, even though there's people around. There's just little spots and patches where no one goes, and they like to live there. And another thing they did that was funny, and it had to be them, when I first moved in, I have this big circular meadow that's ringed by trees. And up near where that X was, all of a sudden, all the downed trees were placed, instead of going east to west, like how the wind goes, they suddenly were moved going north to south, and they made like a little wall through part of the trees. And I don't know if it was to peek at me or I don't know, but they moved all that. I have pictures of where it was going one way one day, and the next day it all just starts slowly going the other direction. And I mean, that's all I can think of is it was them. Maybe they're blocking me off from their territory, like, don't come in here. I don't know. But I watched that happen. And another time I was sitting outside at night, and we have a big street light here, and I saw a dark shadow in the road. And I watched it, and it would move a little ways, and it would just like almost seem to blend into the asphalt for a minute, and then it would move a little bit and come closer and closer and closer. And I couldn't really see a person. It wasn't an animal. It was just a black shadow. And the way it was creeping around, it got so close, and I just got fed up. I was like, I don't like you creeping up on me. You make me feel very weird when you creep like that. So I just went in the house. I don't really know what that was, if it was a little person or not. And then another time, I'm out in this meadow, and I thought, well, I'll be brave at night, and I'm going to sit in the middle of the meadow and see what happens. And I sat there all of 15 minutes and heard noise coming, rustling in the grass from all directions. And I don't like that. I don't like being snuck up on. I would be better if you just walked out and said hello than have things creeping at me from all directions. I'm not going to sit for that. And I just went in the house. I was like, fine, if you're going to be like that. And then another time, everybody says, oh, if you go to the woods, it'll heal you. Maybe the little people would heal you. And I thought, well, it's worth a shot. I had a frozen shoulder, and it hurt so bad. And I just really wanted it to go away. And I got a chair, and I put it with my back to that little fence and the little people. And I just asked them, if you have healing abilities, I'm open to that. My shoulders really hurt, and I can't seem to fix it on my own, and I don't know what to do. And all of a sudden, a bird lands like on the branch above my head, maybe 10 inches above my head, startles me. I jerked my shoulder really bad, and I got mad at him and went in the house because I felt like that's too much of a coincidence. But your little bird startled me, and it hurt me again, and I should have sat there and taken the healing, but I'd already gotten mad. I went in the house, decided no, they're not much help at healing. And when I first moved into the homestead, I was without electricity, and I had some night vision goggles, and I had my 2 wolves, and the homestead was just a little ranch that had once been a homestead. It had 640 acres. It'd been in the family for 100 years almost, and it was surrounded by trees and a ravine and a pond, and you have no lights at night. And electricity is a source of security, I found out, because if you get spooked at night, you just turn on the light, right? Well, I didn't have that opportunity. My flashlights never seemed to work. One night, I'm here in this homestead, and I felt pretty comfortable. I didn't really feel nervous there or anything. And my wolves started barking, and I know when the one wolf barks, it could be anything, but I know when the other wolf barks, something is there because he's not a barker. So I thought, well, I have these night vision glasses. I got to see what's going on out there. And I turned out my lantern, made sure that when I put the night goggles on, there was no light in them, so I didn't ruin them. And I went outside and looked over to what they were barking at. And there was a barn there. And there was also a being there, and its eyes glowed green like my wolves did, so I knew that it was alive. And with the night vision, you get to see the outline of what a thing is, and it was so bizarre. I don't know how tall it was. I really could not tell. I was kind of scared looking at it. I know my heart was beating really good because it did not look like anything I'd ever seen before, and it was scared that I had caught it out there, and it knew for some reason that I could see it because it was looking at me with fear. And I tried to send out this feeling of like, I mean you absolutely no harm, I'm here to share the land with you. I don't own the land, I'm just here too, living. And we looked at each other for a little bit, and my wolves are still going berserk. And then it finally turned sideways to walk away, and that was when I really saw what it looked like. And it had a stick body, it had stick arms, and it had stick legs, just like that stick man we draw as kids, and it had a roundish head. And it walked all disjointed, like sort of like that robot on Star Wars, where how it moves funny. And it's walked behind the barn. And I thought, what in the world is that? So I called up one of my friends, that was one of my teachers, and I was like, Bear, and I told him what it looked like, and I said, what is that? And all he would do was laugh and say, Raven, out of all the people I know, you will be the one that will be able to make contact with things like that. That's all he would say, and he would laugh, and I'm like, that's a lot of help. So I didn't know what it was, and I started out, and he also said that the Nez Perce, when their skinwalkers travel, they travel as a stick man. Well, I didn't know what that meant. I still don't really. And I didn't know of the stick Indians that later are talked about, that I learned about. I don't know anything about any of those things. So I started asking around at a gathering of women, and I asked the peyote man's wife, what are these stick men? And she looked at me funny, and she was like, what do you mean? And I told her what I saw. And she kind of goes, well, I don't know anything about those. She goes, but I do know that the beings in the woods like gifts. They like a handmade gift made of nature. And that's about all I know. Then another lady says, oh, wait, I've seen those things. And she said that her and her daughter were camping in a ravine. And a ravine is the heart of the land. Even in agriculture, they tell you leave the ravines alone. It's like the biosphere. All of the life lives in the ravine. It's the heart of the land. So her and her daughter were going to go camp in this ravine, and they set up their tents and getting ready to, make dinner or whatever. And all of a sudden, the tops of the trees started shaking, but there was no wind. Violent shaking. And it kept on, and they both got spooked, and all they could see was it just, looked like the top of a tree. But she felt like that was the same thing as what I saw, a stick man that lives in a tree. And that's why he looks like a stick, so he can blend in like the chameleon. So I started looking on land, and I found one ravine that was so choked with bushes and everything that the hunters weren't going there. I couldn't even get in there unless I whacked my way in. And I would go there day after day and offer tobacco. I always offered tobacco and asked them, "Are you in there, and who are you?" And one day they started shaking the tops of 3 trees. And all the other trees in the forest are just still. There's no wind. But they violently shook the tops of the trees. And that was all I ever got out of them was, yes, they do live in trees. Evidently, they live in ravines a lot of times. And the reason why they were stirred up in our area was because they had built a new road. And it displaced a lot of things, including the water, the beings, everybody. And I told my neighbor about it, and she was a forest lady. She collected seeds to sell, and she saw one. And she saw it in the daylight. It ran across the road, and she saw it through a rearview mirror, but she said it looked just like what I described. She thinks it was about 5 foot tall, had sticks for arms, sticks for body, sticks for legs, and a little roundish head. And I've never been able to find a complete picture that looks like them online, and I have no idea what they are. Probably there's some natives that know what they are, but I don't know what they are. So back in the house where I lived when the fairies came, it was where I raised my children and everybody else's children that came there that I fed and never went home. And we had a ghost. Everybody knew we had a ghost, and sometimes she would do funny things, like you would reach your hand in this one room to go turn on the light, and she'd just gently push your hand back out, close the door. Or sometimes we saw orbs that would go up the wall and on the ceiling, and it was a very large orb, and it was literally there. I mean, you could see it was there. No lights on in the room, and it was glowing. The kids knew that it was there, and then they started telling me a story that when I was at night, I came home one night, and they were like, "Oh, Mom, something happened, and there were 3 loud booms. And we don't know what it was, and it shook the windows, and we thought somebody was messing with us, but it was a concrete house. There's no way you can shake a concrete house. I mean, unless it's the ground or something like that moves." And at first I didn't pay attention to them, and then it happened a couple of times. And then one of my sons came home, and he had seen an article where there had been people killed in our house. And that's maybe why it was vacant when we got it. But one of them was a little girl, and she was just still there. And I would come in sometimes and catch one of my kids talking to her. Like he could actually talk to her and see her. And we really weren't afraid of her or anything. One day I'm at home at night. Kids are gone, and I heard those 3 bangs. There were 3 bangs. Sounded like a shotgun going off, and that was how I think the people were killed in that house. It was almost like an echo. Still remains in the house. Every once in a while it would boom. I don't know if it was on the anniversary of the day it happened or what. It didn't happen often. But she was always in the house, and that was part of what drew me to go into learning how to help entities pass over, because I felt like she was stuck due to trauma. And then we had another house that I worked at where she had some kind of being, and I don't always know names for them, but I can perceive that they're there. And this being would literally appear like you see in a movie where it'd be smoke and then a being appears. And those are never good. I think they're like the jinn or the smoke, the black smoke. That's how they appear. He was jinn-like. He was not a good being. He would do things like once he knocked the owner a few feet and hurt her. And one time, I swear, something knocked me. I was walking down the stairs and I felt something hit me and knock me down. So that's a pretty strong spirit that can actually do you harm. And she was a demonologist and Christian and into clearing demons in her ways. And I also do that as my spirit work. I've been trained more in the Native American ways. So we would try to do a house clearing and blessing, and still that thing would come back. And one day I actually got a picture of it in the second story window. You can see the eyes, you can see everything. It's huge, fills the whole window. And it also hurt me. I think that's how I got the frozen shoulder, was wasn't doing anything, and just suddenly in that house my shoulder froze. And I feel like I got an attack, a psychic attack. I wasn't protecting myself enough. And when all that released, I felt like it was a claw that had gotten into me from that being. And her and I kind of fell out. So she said she got rid of it. I don't know if she did or not. And I don't know what to call that thing except for a djinn, because of the black smoke and then just being so mean like that. But I also think it was connected to her and her family. It followed her family or something. And those are just some of my paranormal experiences.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.